Hello and welcome. You are with Argumentative Indians, and I'm Bhuvan Apurva Jha. No other country has been expanding as fast as India lately, beating both China and the United States. Even though output is increasing as a result of pandemic-related governmental spending, a country of $1 billion plus isn't creating enough jobs for its citizens. Meanwhile, the private sector sits on the fence, deterred by dim conditions for new investment. The rising inflation and pandemic-related disruptions too are playing their part in exacerbating this crisis. According to the latest data tracked by private business information and analytics firm Center for Monitoring Indian Economy CMIE, the rate of unemployment in India in September 2022 was 6.43%, showing a downward trend from the August high of 8.3%. According to another CMIE report for the time period of January to April 2022, the number of unemployed in the 20 to 24-year-old age bracket was estimated at just above 2 crores, a 42% unemployment rate. Unemployment in the 25 to 29-year-old age bracket was around 60 lakh individuals, a 12.72% unemployment rate. Cumulatively, the unemployed in the 20 to 29-year-old age bracket constituted nearly 80% of the 3 crore plus unemployed Indians above 15 in India looking for work, but in vain. In 2018, as fertility rates declined, India embarked upon a key demographic transition as its working age population began to grow larger than the population of dependents aged below 14 or above 65, achieving the much wanted demographic dividend that countries such as Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, and others utilized to pave the way for better economic growth with an increased focus on education, job creation, skilling, and health for young people. With India's unemployment crisis unfolding during that window of opportunity to achieve quicker economic growth, what should be the immediate and the long-term strategy to truly harness the potential of India's demographic dividend, as experts call it, rather than let it slip into India's demographic disaster? We are discussing India's unemployment scenario and the possible solutions to it here on Argumentative Indians, and I'm joined by Dr. Amaresh Dubey, Professor of Economics at the Center for the Study of Regional Development, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Thank you so much, Professor Dubey, for joining us this evening here at Argumentative Indians. Professor Dubey, let me begin this discussion with your analysis of the scale and the magnitude of the crisis that India is faced with, especially when you look at numbers. Is India actually facing an unemployment crisis that is its own making, or is it a possible blip in the radar just because of the COVID-19 pandemic scenario and the disruptions that followed? Professor Dubey.
Yeah, thank you, Apurva. And before I begin, I would like to thank the organizers, and in this case, Mayank, who has been in touch with me and has been rather persistent for getting me over for this webinar. Thank you, Mayank, and great to know you, and you too, Apurva, for setting the background for this particular topic, which is of utmost importance. In fact, at the end of the day, whatever activity or economy and anything that is happening, that is for the people, for the population, and the most important aspect of health of a population is basically how people are earning their living and how they are employed or not employed. And the crisis that you mentioned is precisely because of this, because there are people work hands which needs gainful work or gainful employment. That's basically the scenario. And as you have cited some references, cited some of the reporting from CMIE, the highest unemployment is in the age bracket 20 to 29, which is about, that covers about 80% of the total unemployed. But before we get to that, in fact, unemployment per se is one of the aspects of employment in general. And I will take you through what has been happening to employment from its measurement issues to start with, and as well as within the context of growth that India has had, especially accelerated growth over the last 30 years, starting after the reforms of 1991. For that, I'll have a presentation, and as the things stand, I have just about 16, 17 effective slides so that there is a time for explaining what I want to say. That is one. Two, leave some time for questions, as Apurva, you have already said that you have a set of questions already to fire at me, and of course from the audience if they can. And therefore, when I share this screen, it is it's here, and if you don't mind if I move to presentation mode.
Sure.
So what we have here is what I'm going to talk is actually resulted from work that with a friend, you might have heard of his name, in fact is much better known than perhaps me, is Dr. Lavis Bhandari. Lavis has been running a consultancy company and he managed it for about 15, 17 years and left it, and now he manages, he has a foundation, it's called Indicus Foundation. And it was Lavis who was approached by the chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council to look at what is the employment situation in 21st century in India, and what are the challenges that that could be there or that are there. And certainly one of them is unemployment. I mean, unemployment is because those who are willing to work or prepared to work do not have the work to do. We have submitted that report, and it got coverage in the newspapers, and there were, as is with any kind of research that has so much of public relevance and public policy concern, there have been discussion and debates around it. And what I am going to do in this presentation, before I take you to what exactly we did in the paper or white paper or report that we have submitted to the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, there are a couple of sections that I added, because that was basically the number crunching and stating or finding out what is happening to the employment. Employment situation, the context, or what essentially is, I just wanted to move this a little bit left, because, or I can perhaps change something here. Is there any way we can change the location? I'll just move it this way, because
I think it's well visible, Professor Dubey.
okay. No, it's not visible to me, actually. That's the problem. There are some parts, so I'll just put it this way. Yeah.
Right.
The background in which we did this work is put it in black and white here, was that over the last couple of years, that is, we are working on it on 2019, and even the situation has not changed. So I could very well say that over the last 4 years, there have been a whole lot of discussion around employment, especially when the NSS changed the employment surveys from a quinquennial rounds that used to be roughly 5 years since 73, 74 to periodic labor force survey, and the whole idea of this particular change was to provide employment statistics far more at a much greater frequency than it was happening with the unemployment and unemployment surveys of NSS, which continued until 2011-12. That was the last round of large surveys, longitudinal surveys. So what happened was that this report was leaked, and based on this leaked part of the report, the general conclusion that was drawn was that unemployment rates in India is at the highest level in 45 years, that is since 1973-74, which is around the numbers that you have given. However, once the data was put in public domain, based on report, there are not many things can be done, but once the data was put in the public domain, what was essentially argued and worked out by several people, including us, was that the employment is basically declining, thereby implying that the unemployment rate is because there are not enough employment is generated, especially after the change in the government in 2014. So that's the background in which this particular work was done. And to everybody's surprise, and that's where there were a lot of critical comments and critical observations on what we have concluded with that in that work. Part of that I'm going to be sharing with you, and I have not added analysis of newer PLFS data sets because the arguments are not going to change. And as you just said, that unemployment rates, whatever it was in 17, 18, there has not been much of a change since then. 6.6% is what it was, and it is stable that for last 3-4 years. Yeah. To contextualize the discussion, a lot of it I'll go over very quickly, is that, well, yeah, it's just a reminder to us. It's not that I am making any argument here, is that we have been a predominantly agricultural economy. Most of the labor engaged in the subsistence farming activities, and there was rudimentary industrialization at the time India embarked on the course of rapid industrialization. One of the consequences of that, which there is that we leave for another day, as I was saying, that poverty and what has happened to poverty, somehow it's not being discussed now over the last few years, because employment per se actually captures some aspects of poverty as well. So what was this economic situation of the country at that point, at the time of independence, was India has been the home to the largest number of poor in the world. It might as well be, but still there was a time when 3 in every 5 poor in the world used to be an Indian. And that scenario has changed quite a bit, but India's contribution in terms of sheer number, proportions have gone down, which some of our work suggests, which is not up to date because the data is not available. And what we did think, and what was the thought process was, in fact, even in pre-independence period, the thought process was that India has been home to the largest number of poor, and therefore to eradicate mass poverty, Indian growth must be the fastest. In fact, there was a committee appointed way back in 1930s, which recommended that India's wealth must be increased by 2.5 times to 3 times within a span of 10 to 15 years, and to at least have some credible impact on poverty reduction or reduce poverty or mass poverty in India. That is the kind of scenario that we had. The second one is just starting from there. I am taking you through the growth performance of Indian economy since 50-51. The left hand, the graph on the left panel is about the real growth of per capita income as well as gross national income as such. And as expected, it moves into the waves, and there is a clear-cut demarcation, which the line keeps above 0% per annum growth starting in the early 80s, which is somehow, there are some people who have argued there are some bit of reforms were brought in by the then government, which resulted in a higher growth, slightly higher growth than historically observed. And there are people who have called it Hindu rate of growth. And as can be seen, so for the first 30 to 32 years, 32, 33 years, the growth rates, if you look at, it has been hovering around somewhere around 2.5 to 3%, which is basically summarized in much more coarse way by decades in this right-hand panel, which is basically a bar chart. And as one can see, 80s, the per capita income increase has been at the rate of 3%, and the economy has been growing above 5%. And that has cumulatively, or rather stepwise acceleration has been there through the decade starting 1980s. Now, with this growth and the period, which is a reference period here for the unemployment, as I have pointed out earlier, is 73, 74, and 70s, as one can see, the growth has been absolutely dismal. The per capita income growth during that period was hardly 0.5%, and whereas the net national income was increasing at under 3% or slightly more than 2.5% per annum during the 70s. What are the expected consequences out of this is that, well, perhaps the implication of whatever the analysis or whatever the argument that has been that are being put forward is that, well, in 70s the growth was so low, per capita income was hardly growing, and the unemployment rates were 6.6% in 73, 74, and in 2000, latter part of 2010s, if that kind of growth, that kind of unemployment rate is observed when the per capita income is growing at close to 6% and economy is growing at over 7% on an average, is sort of that's a kind of contrasting result, or contrasting result emerges, and that is, to my mind, that is the kind of argument, or that is the crux of the argument that, and in fact, there are some people who have called it jobless growth, actually, at some point. Now, in order to understand what was happening and how it happened is this particular slide. The key message from this slide is, one, the share of primary sector, which structural change does warrant, and in fact happened world over, that from about 65% of the labor force working in the primary sector, and it has the share of primary sector in the gross value added was about 65%, which has come down to 17%. But in terms of employment, which was over 70%, has come down to only 38%. So that's one red point, or one point that needs to be sort of highlighted in the red, is that the employment structure has changed, but it hasn't changed as much as the change in the economic change in the structure of the economy or value added warranted. And that is one of the issues that plays out very importantly when we start unpacking or sort of looking deeply into what is happening to employment as well as unemployment. So then what I want to show here is that before I get into measurement of employment per se, there are definitional issues. In fact, when I give you some numbers to look at, the measurement issues in Indian employment, in fact, in general, and any economy or any country, any geographical domain, which has subsidiary subsistence agriculture for a large proportion of its population and for a long period of time, then how do you define employment there? It was sort of formalized way back in early 70s by M.L. Dantwala, and there is a working paper which I had looked at in the Mumbai University Library on employment and unemployment and how they have been defined. And one of the things which is to be noted, because this is something that gives a very different result, is subsidiary status. Because the economy has been predominantly agricultural economy, the usual principle status is when a person works for right through for a given number of hours, which could be 8, 10 hours, and that puts the person, that then is the person is usual principle status. The definitional issues are depending on number of days that a person works full-time. And the second one is subsidiary status, is that in addition to UPS, is a person who is involved in the subsidiary work as well. So what happens is, for example, if there is a student who is supposed to be full-time student, and therefore usual status of that particular person is a student, but that person could also be doing some work, and that will be captured in in SS or subsidiary status. And this is typical to the developing economies in general, and India in particular, where this is the way the employment was measured. And this plays a very important role in establishing or showing first that the decline in employment is actually not with the full-time or what we call the usual employment status, but it is because of subsidiary status. That is what I show. What we have here is basically used employment and unemployment survey of 2004-05 and 2011-12, and then PLFS of 2017-18, which corresponds to broadly the way the employment and unemployment statistics has been calculated during the concluding rounds. The two things that are important here is, one, the period covered, that is agriculture year from July of 2004 to June of 2005, July of 2011 to June of 2012, and exactly the same time frame that agriculture year is considered here. And then there is, in case of PLFS, then there are two parts in it. One, a part of the survey is now designed to cover revisit the persons and households in urban sector, and therefore there is a revisit section in the household. However, the first visit in the PLFS surveys every quarter is similar to, in fact, almost identical to what it has been in the unemployment and unemployment quinquennial round of survey. And therefore the data comparability, as far as I can understand, as far as I have checked it, is no issue at all. And therefore the comparison that we are going to make is as if it is completely comparable. And this is precisely one of the critical comments that we have received is the data are not comparable, which is not the case, by the way. Well, the first set of demographic information that we have is NSS sample, the number of persons, and the persons who are employed in sample, in population estimate as we get from National Sample Survey Organization. And this last column is population estimate that has to be adjusted for census population or projected census population of that particular year. In this case, 17-18 the census adjusted population figures are obtained as it would have been on the 1st January of 2018, 1st January of 2012, and 1st January of 2005. So it's a mid-year estimates, and that's the standard practice that is used. So as can very well be seen that there is quite a bit of mismatch or gap between those two population estimates. Sample estimates over the years would differ because the sample sizes kept changing without, of course, compromising with the representativeness of the samples selected. So the samples are representative in all 3 years. Sample sizes has been changing, which is standard thing that NSS has been doing starting 73, 74. So this is one statistics that goes into it. These numbers, then when we put just these numbers, and these are estimated numbers in a million, and this slide is something that gives us the absolute number of persons reported as working as per the UPS, that is usual principal status, is working as per SS, that is the first row after the headings. The second one is working as per subsidiary status. And as can be seen, there is a massive drop in persons working in subsidiary status. That is one, which has come down by close to 95 million persons. However, the working as per UPS has increased by about 45 million. So from 41 crore or close to 42 crores working as per UPS, it has increased to 45.46 crores in 17-18. So there is a net increase in the number of persons working in UPS. And if you try to unpack those employed in SS, this is one of the point I was making, that working in UPS as well as SS. So there were about 99 million working both in UPS as well as they reported working in subsidiary activities as well, which again came down drastically by about 66 million. And along the way, the other set or the other group that is in the labor force, that is those who are unemployed, and there were about 2.5 million reported unemployed as far as their usual status is concerned, but they were working in subsidiary status, and that has also come down to 1.1 million. Now, not in labor force is another number that we need to look at, and we find that this again has declined quite substantially, and that's how it looks like. So what do we conclude from here? My conclusion, our conclusion in the paper is that unlike the way it has been argued that employment has been declining is not the case. Employment, if at all there has been decline, that has happened only in the subsidiary status, and that's massive. Over a 13-year period between 4-5 and 11-12 to 4-5 to 17-18, the total employment might have declined, but employment or those who are working in UPS has increased, and the decline, the only place where it declined was those who are working in subsidiary status. That is the key message that is there. And then also the contribution into that count, that number, the decline in employment number used to be the double counting of the people who were actually showing as unemployed as well as working in subsidiary or not in labor force and working in subsidiary. So for this much of double count in any case was there, and that needed to be taken care, and therefore the discussion on the employment must be restricted to UPS, and the reason is that subsistence farming, etc., as we have seen, its share has come down. The number of people who are working in those has come down, and therefore this is one of the most important things that we need to look at. Next is growth. How the employment and population has been growing over the years, and this gives an idea, about the demographic dividend question that you have raised. And if we look at the population growth from 2011 to 2017, or one can just look at the last column, that is 2004 to 2017. The population has been growing at the rate of 1.72%, and employment has been growing at the rate of 0.8. Now, if we split or divide it into rural and urban, and yes, still a large proportion of Indian population lives in rural and urban, then what we find is that rural employment has first declined. There is a slight decline between 2004 and 11, and then it increased between 2011 and 17, and the rate was dismal, just about 0.2% per annum, but it has been increasing. Urban population has been increasing. The natural plus migration has been 2.85% for the overall period, and the employment increased by 2.51. So there is a less mismatch, and the employment has been rising in the urban sector. In case of rural sector, the employment declined, or decline in total employment, if we are looking at UPS only, has been stagnation in 2004 to 2011, whereas for other sub-periods or overall period, it has been rising, as it can be seen. And this particular slide, Jahasab, I'm not monitoring the time, so how much time, about 10-15 minutes more?
Sure, Professor Dubey. Please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so this one is about how these numbers have changing over the years. And as one can see, the employment in case of rural has been stagnant from 30.2 crores to 30.5 crores. There's hardly any increase. And that is reflected in that essentially gives you the growth rates are on the two rightmost columns is something that we have picked up from there. And then when you look at the male female, that is another added information here. In case of male, the employment has been male dominated in India in any case, and it has increased from 30 crores to 36 crores. And it has come down in net terms to about 9.7 crores from 11.2 crores in 2004-05. So female employment has declined, although with a marginal increase from 11-12 to 2017, and that would be about 2 million perhaps, from 9.5 crores to 9.7 crores. Next is age group, and here it addresses some of the age group that has been mentioned in CMI data. And what we see here is that there has been decline in the employment when we start looking at through age categories from 0 to 24 years of age. And there is a massive decline from about 8.7 crores to just about 5.4 crores. So there is a decline here. And in case of 25 to 59, in fact, it was used to be 15 to 59, for which the employment was traditionally measured, and unemployment and employment statistics has been put forward. There is a net increase of close to 7 crores over this particular period. And there is increase in those above 60 because life expectancy has increased, and there are people who are working even as 60, including the public sector and autonomous government institutions and bodies. There is a further breakup here for both males and females. And what is highlighted here in yellow is where it has for the males or male, those who are working, it has declined for up to age 24. Whereas it has increased for all other age groups. In case of women, it has actually declined for all age groups across the board. And this this can be dealt with or has been dealt with separately in some other papers we have worked out, and there are many others who have worked out about female employment and what is happening and what is not happening there. A whole lot of other questions and issues come up there, like discrimination against women and repression of women and so on. So I don't want to get into those details, and where I want to take you through is the increase in employment in rural sector, as well as we find the similar thing in urban sector, except that for urban sector, 25 years and above, it has increased from both male and female across the board. So whatever one is decline in employment is happening. Those who are under 24, and in rural areas for all the women. In case of urban areas, women are more like the employment pattern and change is now started reflecting more like what happens to in case of male. The similar story is with the employment, and where I want now you to focus is this one, and that is about the education and unemployment. There are several ways or several crosstabs that can be generated from for unemployment. And please also note that I have taken the unemployment status, which used to be even earlier, used to be taken as UPS status. So unemployment is reflected only in UPS status. So what we get here is that between 2004-05 and 2017-18, for all education levels, unemployment has increased. There are some of the total has been highlighted, and in some cases it has doubled, and in some cases it has more than doubled. Now, what is the key message that we get from here? The key message that I would I thought is that those are the unemployment or increase in unemployment is primarily, it's not only the age group that CMIA data has been showing, but it is also those who are less educated. In fact, 60 to 70%, and these are all numbers in millions actually. So if you just add it up, say for example, up to from illiterate to secondary or higher secondary, you'll find that, well, most of is about 3.5 million unemployed are from this category. So, and a whole lot of them probably are the ones who have dropped out of the education or dropped out of the school and education system, and that is similarly reflected across the board. And in fact, from the employment statistics, and we have worked it out in different other ways, but I did not brought in those numbers because I just didn't want to bombard you with numbers. But where does it take us? It's taking us to a scenario where the rural employment has been stagnant, and there has been, I would say decline, but there has been stagnant, it has been stagnant. So most of the unemployment in terms of the number, if you start looking at, is as one can see, is in rural areas. That is 50, in 17-18, there were 18 million people unemployed, 18.7 unemployed in rural areas, whereas in urban it was 13.6. In terms of proportions, percentage and proportions, of course, urban may be a little higher than the rural, but this is one scenario that emerges, that unemployment is one higher in the rural areas, and this, in absolute terms, it's lower in urban areas, and it has increased between 4-5 and 11-12. There is no, and this is happening despite the fact that there has been net increase in the employment, provided we measure the employment only through UPS status. These are the two key points that I will have and refer to when we are going to be discussing the unemployment scenario that I would like to summarize this first, and the last slide I have left for the discussion on unemployment issue and what are the possible routes through which one can start working, and that will have a dent or that could affect decline or that could reduce unemployment. This is what I have already discussed. Employment generation depends on type of economic activity. More and more employment has to be generated or has to come into the non-primary activities. And that is something that will expedite the decline in the mismatch in the structural change that has happened in the economy and in the labor market. These two have to basically be should be moving in tandem rather than one being slightly higher than the other. The next one is where the employment has increased, that is in the non-primary sector, but there is a decline in employment up to 25 years of age. And this is one thing which has been argued, and we have also done some work separately in some other contexts on education and enrollment. And it turns out that higher education, enrollment in higher education, which used to be something like 11-12% in 2004-05 has increased up to 30%. At least in 2017-18 it was 27%, so it must have increased further because more and more people are coming into higher education. The second thing is about that is specifically in case of women or female unemployment and decline in female employment. That again is more and more females are also coming into higher education, which earlier the enrollments were pretty skewed towards male, but now it's getting more and more equal or equitable as of now, or moving towards equality as far as enrollment is concerned. In fact, the primary and secondary education, it's more or less equal now, but it's the tertiary education where there are a lot of gaps are still there. Now, this is where the slide, I will first stop after making 2-3 observations. One, unemployment has increased, and it's increased substantially over 2004-05 in 2017-18. In terms of absolute numbers, it's about 32.3 million or something like that, which is in 17-18 it was about 6% plus. But where it is higher, if we refer to the table that I have provided or I have presented here, it is one, higher unemployment rates are those who are illiterate or literate but educated up to secondary or higher secondary, more so in the rural areas. And in case of urban areas, the scenario is similar. But what is to be done so that all of them can be employed is a question that has to be considered, considering the endowment or employment attributes of those who are unemployed. So one way of handling it, or one way of at least addressing the unemployment question between 2004-05 and 11-12 has of course been NREGA, that is providing employment in the rural areas which was essentially for unskilled worker. And the ones who are unemployed at the moment in urban as well as in rural areas are, if not illiterate, they are basically semi-skilled. There's certainly, there's a large proportion is unskilled and other one is semi-skilled. And that semi-skilled status is not only those who are educated up to secondary or higher secondary. In fact, it's a kind of scenario that we live in where that kind of semi-skilledness goes right up to even those who have attained the highest level of education. So there is a question of employability, and the addressing unemployment challenge has to be seen from that point of view, or from that perspective. In fact, if I remember correctly, recently there was an announcement by the Rajasthan government that they are initiating a similar scheme as has been the Rural Employment Guarantee Act and scheme to provide employment for unskilled labor for X number of days, 100 days or so. Then similar scheme in Rajasthan, urban areas also, at least there is a process to start that. But the unemployment as it is, as you have pointed out right in your opening remark, that it is something that could convert or could result into a demographic disaster than the demographic dividend. Now, demographic disaster in some sense is still there, because the ones who are unemployed and the ones who, and we have looked at the numbers, because there has been a drastic change in the kind of people who could be employed. So there is return to educations have increased, and therefore the education and skill is absolutely important to get into the labor market and find employment. And how to address those challenges is the reforms actually we need in every aspect, every sphere of the economy. And the two most important reforms are agriculture, in fact, land reforms. And the land reforms and agriculture reforms, they could be put together actually. And there has been the issue of change in the land holding pattern, or what we call the land use pattern. One is urbanization, because more and more population, because the work is not going to be available, become available, or will be available in the primary sector activities, where the space or land is one of the primary requirement, but it is going to be created, it has to be created, it will get created only in the non-primary sector, which does concentrate in the space, which is basically the urbanization. So some kind of urbanization, etc., is going to be happening, and the process has been faster. India's urban population share has been increasing, but very slowly. So now, of course, we don't have the current census, but the estimates are India, as per 2011 census, it was somewhere around 30 or 32%. Numbers I don't remember, but it has increased from very low level to 30%. So that is going to increase further. And if that is going to increase further, because activities, our economic activities, have to concentrate in space, and therefore land use pattern, the change in the land reforms are absolutely necessary. In fact, in some cases, there was one particular reforms that which I thought was backward step in the land reforms scenario, was specific rights to tribal for the lands. Not that it just doesn't mean that the tribal should be dispossessed, but the thing is that there has to be a reform in a way, and there are a number of projects, development projects, including infrastructure projects, are getting delayed because of some thing or the other which relates to the land and change in the land use pattern. Because now how do we go about it and how do we create more employment is one, of course. This doesn't have, one doesn't have to be a sort of a development economist to make this kind of statement, because infrastructure, massive infrastructure investment is required in every field, from basic to higher level infrastructure. The second, along with that, agriculture reforms, not only in the land use and land reforms, but agriculture reforms, which were there, and we had seen only Green Revolution 1. The other areas in the India or other states and geographical domains must look into reforming the agriculture. And one of the most important aspect is the decline or drop in the average landhold agricultural cultivable land sizes. It has become completely uneconomical for anyone to cultivate it, and therefore the ones which are marginal and nominal holders are land holdings now, there is a category in employment when we classify it in UPS, that self-employed in agriculture, that has completely sort of is becoming redundant gradually. And labor reforms, a lot of talk has been going on about labor reforms, and it's a sort of double-edged sword. No labor laws are applicable for how many? 90 to 92% of the labor force in any case. So it's only just about 8% and where all kind of labor laws, etc., are admissible. So that needs to be rationalized. In another paper that we were doing with one of my students, and what we looked at, there have been attempts to reform it. And it happened to be in some cases state subject, and therefore there has been some labor reforms for industrial sector in different states, and it's what has been its consequences. It's too early to say, because these reforms were initiated very recently, in some cases leaving out that too, those reforms were partial. Up to a certain number of employees, if a factory has, they have free hire and fire kind of policy, and above that threshold, I think it was 100, now it has been increased to 300 in some cases. And the third thing that I would look at is education reforms. There has been a lot of discussion, talk about webinars, seminars, discussions about new education policy, and in that new education policy, there is a restructuring of how the education is going to be imparted. But along with that, there is a serious issue of quality. At a time when we were working on the enrollment, especially in tertiary education, what we found was that enrollment in tertiary education is mostly in case of general degrees. The skill acquisition has never been on the agenda, like say post higher secondary diploma or postgraduate, after graduation, the diploma. The proportions are very, very low. So the skill which has rightly been at least identified by the current government, and especially Prime Minister Modi's emphasis and huge push for kaushal vikas or skill development, that has there is yet to be, I mean, somebody has yet to essentially do the assessment and monitoring of this, how much it is affecting and how much has it affected. So that needs to be, and in fact, some parts of education reforms, especially NEP, is trying to address these issues, that along with the general things, the students should also be provided, along with that, some vocational education, so that they acquire some kind of skills which is going to be helpful for them to get the employment in the labor market or join the labor market. So as far as key question that you had asked me to dwell upon, I want to summarize, and these are the last few couple of sentences. One, the notion that the unemployment has increased because over the last, for the period that I have analyzed the data or given the empirical support, the unemployment has increased because employment has been declined is not the case. It's the sort of change or dynamics or structure that is changing. Earlier, there were a lot of people who were employed as they are defined in their full-time and UPS category. Whole lot of them were also working in subsidy categories. Now that has changed drastically, and the full-time employment or UPS, full-time could be a misnomer, but UPS employment has increased. Now that puts the unemployment numbers in perspective, that these are the people, they are not looking for employment in subsidiary status. That is the key issue. Earlier, right, whatever it was, even if somebody is employed in subsidiary status, he was considered as employed, and as numbers have shown, it was substantial. Even though the person is unemployed, he was working subsidy capacity. So there are more and more people are now demanding work as a full-time as in UPS. That's one. Second, those who are demanding it, unfortunately, there are serious skill. They lack skills in a serious way. So most of those who are unemployed have to invest first acquisition of skills and then rejoin the labor market. And in addition to that, the opportunities get created if some of these massive infrastructure investment is done, and then agriculture and land reforms, labor reforms, education reforms, and remaining financial reforms. There have been 2-3 stages of financial reforms, but there are some few still left. Thank you so much for having me over in this initiative that we have started, Argumentative Indian. I really enjoyed it. Thank you both, Jhaza and Kavra. Mayank.
Thank you, Professor Amresh Dubey, for what was the most comprehensive and exhaustive introduction to the discussion that we are hoping to have in the course of the time to follow. Obviously, you brought up a host of topics, the what, the hows, the whys, and the way ahead, obviously, and we hope to tackle that individually during the course of the discussion. But before I move forward, it is pertinent for me to announce that for those of you who are watching us on YouTube or on Zoom, if you have any questions for Professor Amaresh Dubey, please feel free to type them in the chat box. We will be featuring select questions during the course of the discussion. Professor Amaresh Dubey, with your permission now, obviously we'd like to delve deeper into the issues that you have raised. And I'd like to begin most pertinently with the agriculture segment. Now, you spoke about the primary sector being the most important sector in terms of employing people. One thing that has been in agreement with experts all around has been that both the organized and the unorganized sectors must necessarily have to adopt labor-intensive technologies. Now, if sufficient employment opportunities have to be generated, both again in rural and urban areas. But then again, what we have seen is that increasing mechanization of agriculture in various states has lowered the employment elasticity of growth of agricultural output. And of course, the use of labor-intensive techniques with lower productivity of workers may again lower the growth of output. So thus there might be a trade-off in the sense between employment and growth output. Where would you stand on that? Should growth output be actually sacrificed for the sake of more employment, or should it be the other way around?
Well, personally, I don't agree with this argument that agriculture or some sectors have to be continue to be labor intensive. you're swimming against the tide. That's my take. Meaning the changes that are occurring, the mechanization of agriculture that is happening is bound to happen. Therefore, thinking that the employment in agriculture sector or primary sector would be, there could be some kind of process through which we could make that more and more labor intensive is not going to happen. In fact, I'm reminded of I am old enough, as you might just see, when the computers or electronic revolution started taking place, and the computers were being brought into India, or India decided to start digitizing, meaning getting the computers and getting into it. There was this, and there were movements, there were buns and all kind of thing about the computer adaptation of computers will make the labor redundant. Similar kind of theme was there, that computer is basically displacing the labor. Does that happen? Did that happen? The answer is no, it did not happen, in the sense that the way it was feared. What it did do, of course, now you need a little more of skills to be employable on machines and computers that we use, and therefore it increased the demand for the skilled labor. But employment did not go down. So in case of mechanizing agriculture is a must to increase the productivity. I will take you back to a very old paper by Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, which he wrote as a graduate student way back in 1917 or 1918, while he was a student at Columbia University. Yeah. And his paper is on agriculture and how it's becoming, that time he has seen it, or at least argued and shown it, that gradually the agriculture is becoming uneconomical. The reason, he had a very different argument, but the implication of that argument is still valid as it was then, that given the Hindu succession law, the land gets divided among the new households that split, which earlier were undivided Hindu families. And the size of land holding declines. And for doing agriculture, or for agriculture, you required the proportions, land, labor, and other inputs in equal, in a kind of proportion that is profitable and that's productive, that gives you optimal level of production. Right. So today, the farms or farming does require that. One is that one of the land reform also needs to be taken in the direction of increasing the land size. There are some initiatives like land pooling and farmer producer organizations and so on and so forth. But does that allow, or is it allowing for agriculture to be done economically with the optimal use of technology is something that is missing. One can say we stop it today, but that is a direction that it has already gone. The world over, this is what has happened. Large farms are the order of the day, and whatever labor is required, that labor will, in terms of its total requirement, will keep on reducing, and they have to be redeployed somewhere else. The share of the labor in agriculture has to go down at least to the level of its share in the GB, gross value added, so that their productivity.
So, Professor Dubey, just for the benefit of our viewers, you are advocating not just for land reforms and for labor reforms, but also for the inheritance laws that are present in our country for agricultural benefit, for agricultural output to increase. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying it, but there has to be found how the land is not divided.
Right.
Any division of land makes it. Excuse me. Yeah.
Yes. So you're basically saying that we need some sort of legislative intervention in terms of the inheritance laws, say how land is segregated and fragmented into n number of parts, and thereby leading to lower
that's right.
agricultural
I mean, some way,
productivity.
there has to be
Right.
some intervention. We have to find a way of addressing that.
Right. Professor Dubey, your presentation also spoke about the role of women and how women have been at the shorthand of when it comes to receiving employment opportunities, and that is applying both to rural and urban areas. What's the primary reason behind that? Is it because of the societal norms? Is it because of lack of opportunities or flexible opportunities? Or is it patriarchy in action? What's the primary reason why women are not taking the lead insofar as employment opportunities, both in rural and urban areas, is concerned?
Yeah, in case of women, some of the points that you just made, that has been the received wisdom, and that's the way it has been explained. Because in India, women employment has declined. There has been secular decline in women employment, and there are various arguments that have been put forward. For example, there used to be income effect, that is, as household income increases, the women who are in the labor force start withdrawing, and so on, and including patriarchy and other things. But the thing is that most of that happened only in the primary sector, and somewhere we have shown it that the employment for the women declined in the primary sector the most. It's not only for women, but it is also for men. So that is the sector where there is surplus labor, which is gradually the viability of agriculture for the small farmers has been going down. The second is that wherever the agriculture and farming is still going on there, it's if not massive, it's some kind of technological intervention, like plowing. Most of the operations that were in agriculture are gradually being substituted or gradually becoming mechanized. The other thing about the women was their education, and especially secondary and tertiary education. And in rural areas, the employment for women that has declined, and where it's not available is, as it happened, it has declined for all the age groups over the last over the 13-year period for which we have data. But in case of urban areas, if you look at the primary working age, that is 25 plus, the employment trend or employment numbers are emerging, which is much more similar. That is, it's increasing, and it's much more similar to what is happening to the male. So patriarchy, you see, these are the terms which are cultural, and those scenarios are also changing. Even then, if there is decline in the women's employment, is because of the insufficient employment attributes, meaning education and other things, and of course availability of the job opportunities in the areas which are, one, non-agriculture, two, who are skill-based and commensurate to their skill. Therefore, the investment into creating those opportunities in the rural areas could help increase that. And of course, the infrastructure is a must.
Right.
This is something, first it has added to the enrollment of girls into the higher education, and several fold actually. Yeah.
Professor Dubey, again, staying with the topic around women, one thought that was that in fact did gain a lot of traction some time ago was that you include the contribution of women as caregivers and homemakers in the overall national product of a country. That was obviously discussed at length in India. Where would you stand on that? Is that a proposition that will gain traction eventually? Because it's a large segment that is being left out, and it is the bedrock, the foundation of all the numbers and the statistics that we're talking about, the women caregivers at our household.
Yeah, so here, what the issue is that that's more of a definitional issue. Right in the beginning, I pointed out the way it was defined that subsistence farming was going on, and therefore we had UPS and subsidiary status. Now what we have is, in case of women, the new researches, especially their time use, has emerged, and yours truly, in fact, we have also carried out some field work typically in rural areas of Eastern UP and Western Bihar to look at how does the women decide or divide into time use of economic activities. The moment we say economic activities is that which falls in the purview of definition of work, for which we are talking about the employment. But what are the activities, which several of these activities are there, which they perform, if they are doing in the household, is not considered as work, but if the same activities they go outside and do elsewhere rather in the market, it's considered as work. Therefore, what you just pointed out, that direction of argument will become reality as along the way when the household sizes are becoming smaller, we have nucleus households, and more, we would start depending more and more on the market for almost everything. And so that is the kind of development that we have seen across the globe. Okay, there almost everything people are depending upon in on the market.
Another area that I wanted to explore with you in the course of this discussion, Professor Amresh Dubey, was gig economy. Now, this is a term that has been in vogue in the 21st century, and it has been gaining a lot of traction lately. And with the emergence of technology-enabled platforms, gig economy is going to become a major building block if India is going to achieve the $5 trillion economy mark. And most recently, in fact, so much so, the Prime Minister himself spoke about it at the 44th National Conference of Labour Ministers, where he batted for flexible workplaces, work from home ecosystems, and flexible work hours. However, again, most recently, a leading IT firm in Hyderabad handed out pink slips to almost 400 of its employees for what was termed as moonlighting, the recent phenomenon where a person is working for multiple organizations, calling it an integrity issue. Professor Dubey, do you think that the time has come where we legalize this sort of multi-role that an individual takes on through, say, legislative amendments, give it legal backing so that the interests of the employees is safeguarded? Because again, this is going to be a reality going forward. If work from home ecosystems are going to be much more in vogue, much more in practice, these type of opportunities are going to arise for individuals. Why outlaw them?
Look, this is a tricky one in terms of, as you just said, integrity. Right. It's a more like scenario like where somebody is a consultant and doing consulting for different organizations. And if these different organizations are competing organizations, then clearly the issue will come to why the same thing could go come to me and to the other person as well. And therefore, legalization of, you mean the legalization of consulting with multiple firms or multiple employers or multiple places versus one, is something that needs to be looked much more carefully. There are many other issues are involved than this, because
but do you see it becoming gaining traction, at least in terms of conversation, on a national scale, at least?
My personal view would be that's temporary. Moonlighting, I mean, one can do. It's more like what we were just talking about, the subsidiary work and UPS. There was a person who was working in UPS, but was doing, in fact, that kind of data, if you look at, there has been a person was employed in UPS as well as doing 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes even 3 or 4 subsidiary work. Okay, but how different they were, those are the questions that did not arise at that time. Now, if those questions are coming in, and if somebody is paying to a person to do a specific task, the it's other implications. There are intellectual property rights, all kind of issues are to be looked into rather than coming up straight with an answer that, well, this is going to be or not going to be.
Yeah. Professor Dubey, again, moving on to the topic of job creations. Now, basically, you have two entities in the whole country. It's the government and the private entities who are going to provide jobs for the common citizen. However, a notion exists throughout the country that government organizations are overstaffed. Now, that may be partly true because recently a report said that at least close to 8 lakh vacancies exist in various governments, both central and state governments across the country. And Honorable Prime Minister himself in the latest Independence Day speech said that 1 million+ jobs are going to be created in the next 18 months. What's your thought on it? Is it a tacit acceptance of the fact that the private industry has failed to deliver on its promise for jobs? Or is it the governmental commitment anyways in a society such as the Indian Republic, wherein the government owes giving out jobs to its citizens?
I don't think the government owes or the government should be a job provider. And in fact, when I was talking about the reforms, that reforms must start with the government.
Right.
Within the government, that the 800,000, you said 8 lakh, right?
8 lakh vacancies.
800,000 vacancies exist, but filling up those vacancies is a very tedious process.
Mm-hmm.
And there are all kind of issues involved in that. And why is it that these vacancies have been lying vacant in some cases? There is a small window of what we call the turnover time. Okay, a person retires, and by the time you hire that, even that should not be there. If a person retires, a person moves away, the next person should be there to take over, right? But if those vacancies are still there, why is it that they have not been filled for such a long time? If we start addressing that question, one of the issues that comes up is that there are all kind of regulations that are to be followed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, suppose if I were if I am working for the government and if I have to hire somebody, then there are n number of regulations that I have to look at. Now, except for the skill required for a particular job, can't it be that the person is hired for a shorter period of time and see if the person fits the bill? Fair enough. If it doesn't, there should be, I mean, as long as you need it, you do it, you hire the person, and if you don't need, the person should be moved on. He should move on and get, he or she should move on and look for something else.
Right.
In fact, in case of enterprises or investment enterprises, it has actually come to a point where whatever the reforms that were done earlier, and on the based on those, there have been investment. But now it's additional changes are perhaps required. So reforms in all the areas are something that needs to be looked into to get into or to invest into creating more opportunities in the industrial sector, and with that, other allied sector which are non-primary. That's the way I would put it.
Right. But Professor Dubey, again, just continuing on the same thought about job creations in the government sector. Now, unemployment in India does seem to be a federal problem because, again, most particular states at least have higher rates of unemployment, while some states which have the centers of growth or have tourism industries centered in and around their jurisdiction, they have the lesser rates of unemployment. And then again, you have the responsibility of job creation, Professor Dubey, when you look at states, say, such as Bihar, where they are supposed to give out, there is no private industry, the local population is dependent on government jobs. And then you have the Bihar government bungle up entrance examination for the state services. Same thing with Arunachal Pradesh. That results in a lack of trust. So where does the youth aspire for jobs? Is it a behavioral problem that we are looking at, or is it a societal economic problem in terms of investment and industry that has not been formulated over the years in the particular areas, which is leading to us to the situation?
You just said the federal problem, and you have given your explanation, which is completely contrary. It is not a federal problem. The government at subnational level, that is in this case a state level, has not been able to govern properly, if I may say so.
Right.
And if not being able to, because the policies that are there, and there are a number of issues or number of subjects which are concurrent. Right. Now, on concurrent issues, whether it's education, whether it's land reform, whether it's agriculture, whether it's industrial policy and all, why is it that Gujarat or Tamil Nadu have a kind of policies, or Karnataka or Andhra Pradesh? And Andhra Pradesh wasn't so until probably a few years ago, when I think this ushered into that kind of era when Chandrababu Naidu took over as chief minister. Right. So whatever happens at the state level, the responsibility of federal government is to create conducive environment by, say, there are legislations that are at the federal level, for example, economic reforms, for example, educational reform at the federal level, at the central level. But that becoming a federal responsibility, that unemployment is federal responsibility, I don't think the government of India is to be blamed. The policies, it's not only the government of India policies, but this is a policy of the respective state government. Why is it, as you very rightly said, there are different states with a different USP. The ones which with tourism potential, there probably the employment is low, but the ones which have not done anything either on industry or education or even the government recruitment. So they have failed at all levels. So it's more of this unemployment issue is to be addressed by the state governments at much more urgent basis than asking the central government to create jobs and employment.
Right.
Yeah.
Because again, just to add what you're saying, the government can only create an ecosystem for job creation, but eventually it's going to be the various stakeholders that have to create jobs. The government can only create a limited number of jobs.
Yeah, and creating that ecosystem by the central government, there are subjects on central government has the power or has the jurisdiction over creating that kind of ecosystem. In fact, even the infrastructure, there are certain kind of infrastructure that government of India has been putting in massive investment, but corresponding to that, what the state governments are doing. I'll give you an example. And if at all state governments have been doing something, long back, it's about 15 years ago, I did a study on, there was something called Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan.
Yes.
So it's basically an increasing enrollment of children in the primary and middle school. And as that has been required, that has there are some studies which have shown that every additional year of schooling adds X amount or X% to the GDP kind of thing. So SSS was implemented. There was a specific route to recruit teachers, which used to be called para teachers. Now the para teachers were hired in different states, and this was basically towards universalization of primary education, essentially. And what the study showed, that there are several of the states in our sample, they were paying these para teachers less than the minimum wages for unskilled workers. And that particular finding, of course, a study was commissioned by Ministry of Education at that point. We presented that findings in the meeting of the secretaries of education for all the states and territories, including the education secretary in the government of India. And those secretaries were so inimical, or so they took an offense and started saying all kind of things to me. Where did you find this and what did you find that? Of course, it was intervention. And the point here that I'm making is that why is it that some states were paying less than the unskilled wages to para teachers, and some states were not?
Right.
So the creation of that ecosystem is something that at the macro level, the government of India can do or federal government can do, but the respective state government have to play much more important role than perhaps is basically implementing those policies and deriving benefits out of that to the residents of those states. Bihar is classic example. In fact, there have been several aspects of studies or aspects of investigation that has been done on Bihar and Jharkhand. Earlier it used to be Jharkhand, rich in minerals and poor in everything else. Yeah.
Right. Professor Dubey, again, just continuing with your presentation that you had for us, you spoke about the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Recently, a parliamentary standing committee also recommended to the Union government that India needs to formulate an urban national job guarantee scheme on the lines of the MGNR, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Would that be an idea that would find resonance amongst the academia and the civil society, or is that being frowned upon?
In terms of finding resonance and as a policy instrument, theoretically nobody can disagree with it, because right. It's self-seeking. I mean, self-selection. If there is a group of persons seeking employment, but the problem is that at best it is going to be a short-term solution. And right. what kind of employment can urban bodies offer to a person? It is exactly like what is happening in the rural areas. It's unskilled work. Other than that, there's nothing that is coming there. So what would be and how much of that work is available is something that at least doesn't get into my head. How come? I thought I mentioned to you that Rajasthan government has already taken an initiative
yes.
To start that. But yes, in the distress kind of scenario, there are people who might be joining it, that unskilled kind of work. But what other work can be brought into the purview of that Guarantee Act, Urban Employment Guarantee Act, if it comes through, is something that is going to be a tricky issue.
Professor Dubey, another topic that I wanted to bring to your notice was the problem of the skill gap that you spoke about in your presentation. Now, that's not uncommon to find that people would say who have passed out from the best of the journalism colleges would find it difficult to say draft a single sheet of paper in good proper language with no grammatical errors, or a mechanical engineer would know his CAD inside out, or a software engineer would know his coding languages. But that does seem to be a problem, that people who are graduating out of these colleges do not have the requisite knowledge or the requisite tool set or the skill set to find a job that would do justice to their education. So how should India address this skill set gap that we're talking about in terms of the transition from, say, college to a particular job and a job to a particular high ranking or a high paying job? How does that happen over a period of time?
One of the things that has happened in India, that if you get a degree, what you know, say for example, what you just said, a person coming from journalism school, fresh graduate from a journalism school, doesn't know how to draft a page. Yeah. Postgraduate coming out of the universities doesn't know how to write an application. suppose if I ask a student to write an application to address to XYZ for something that he or she needs, invariably there have been, actually the number has been increasing along the way. So the basic things, getting the degree is all that important. There was a time when if you are first division or if you get degree with with a certain percentage of marks, then you aspire to be something else. And if you get lower than that, you aspire to be something else. But that skill, the basic skills have not come in, are not coming. What is it that is not letting that, the students to learn those basic skills is a question that needs to be addressed, not by the government, actually. It needs to be addressed by you and me.
Right. Right, Professor Dubey. In fact, we have come a long way in this discussion. We have discussed the origin of unemployment in India and the contemporary realities that we are living in. And as the clock strikes down to our allotted time, I have to ask you one question before I let you go, Professor Dubey. If you would prescribe, say, a couple of measures in the short term and in the long term for India to deal with this crisis effectively, what would Professor Dubey's prescription be for India to tackle its unemployment crisis that is staring us right down the barrel of the gun?
Reskill those, those who are unemployed. They need to be skilled and reskilled. In fact, whatever skills they have, unfortunately, is not sufficient for them to get a job. I mean, graduates and in the massive scale that we are. In fact, sometimes I'm amazed, as you just pointed out, a graduate from journalism or a graduate from general category, or even engineers coming into the labor market and coming into the work, and they are not able to basic things if they are not able to do.
Yeah.
In fact, what amazes me is that if the whole lot is like this, why is it that, let me put it, why is it that only, say, 32 million are unemployed? The point here is that even with that kind of thing, that people are getting employment, and there are all other networks work there, but those who are unfortunate enough and not to get into any kind of those networks are the ones which needs to be addressed. It so happens that either you get employed through your skill or through your network. These are the only two routes that one can find, right? So the ones which are employed, whether it's underpaid or overpaid, in most cases, my take is that they are overpaid, and the kind of network that they get in. But those who are not, they have to skill themselves and seek that route, getting the employment through skills. Like any day, if you get somebody who is a fresh graduate or graduate from journalism school and able to do the task that that is expected of him or her to do, you will be happy to hire that kind of person. I'll tell you, in some kind of work that I was doing, where there were the short-term positions of research assistants available, and within 2.5 years, I had hired and fired more than 50. These are first graduate in economics. They're supposed to be doing certain tasks, and it's not that everybody, they hardly one or two came through network. Somebody said, Kamal is my student, and help him out or her out. They did it, but hardly one or two of them could stay on for a little longer. If they didn't have a skill, at least they were willing to learn. And there were people who came and they were just not good enough, and they were sort of the amount of work that was needed. And if the person is given the task to do it and is not able to do it, has to go away. So this hiring, firing is something that allowed me to, somehow getting it moving. So the biggest short-term solution is, look, those among those who are unemployed, there are two categories. Category one is that the ones who are unemployed are in a very parasitic condition, that is, it could lead to impoverishment and poverty. And those are the people the original Employment Guarantee Act was expected to help those. 100 days employment in a year and the amount they are earning with the kind of subsidized basic items that are made available would be something that they could do. And the ones who can wait in the labor market. So most of those unemployed with no skills are the people who could still wait in the labor market. And those are the ones who need to get into the task of getting a skill. And in fact, I'm really, really surprised that a scheme like such a wonderfully thought out scheme of skilling India, which was a slogan given by the Prime Minister, doesn't seem to, I have not, unfortunately, the corona for the last 2 years did not allow the kind of interaction that normally we have. We're moving around, interacting with a whole lot of people. But the second part that is, we don't hear too much that, well, I have got a certificate, or at least I have done the skilling on such and such level at such and such place. People, I haven't seen somebody like, say, showing a diploma that, well, I have done this from such and such institution or such and such scheme. That is something that has to be taken seriously, and so that these guys, these boys, the new opportunities that are emerging is something that they can be employed.
Right. Professor Dubey, in fact, you're not alone when you say this, that finding the right skilled person is a difficult task. In fact, in my interactions with various first-time entrepreneurs, this is one problem that commonly arises, that you're expecting a particular caliber when an institution, a graduate from a particular institution is provided in front of you. And then it breaks your heart to see that the person does not have the basics in place. But I think that's what you're hinting at, that self-skilling is the most important facet when it comes to making sure that you're employable for the industry. And it's not just the responsibility of the state, but also of the individual to invest in themselves, to make them more employable, rather than just wait for the right opportunity or for the right moment to turn up. Would that be a correct assessment, Professor Dubey?
Yeah, you put it. Yeah, you put it correctly. Yeah, right.
Right. Indeed, in fact, if India is to take her rightful position as a key stakeholder in global affairs, it needs to set an example for the rest of the world with her ability to generate quality and sustainable jobs for the population. And India does stand at a crossroad, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, and what remains to be seen is where India will be when it celebrates its 100th Independence Day. What is certain, though, is that it will be a very different India. Whether that will be for the positive or for the bad, that's one for the soothsayers to answer. On that note, Professor Amresh Dubey, thank you so much, sir, for your presentation firstly, and then for your candid tete-a-tete. For the last 90 minutes, you have been most candid in your replies, and you have enriched not just me, but for all those who are watching us live on YouTube and on Zoom. Thank you so much, Professor Amresh Dubey, for your presence on Argumentative Indians this evening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Apurva, and thanks, Mayank, for having me over.
Thank you.
Somewhere along the way,
Professor
we
Dubey.
could get on with some other topic next time. Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Professor Dubey. That's our program, ladies and gentlemen. Argumentative Indians is India's fastest growing thought platform, and I'm Bhuvan Apurva Jha. For more of such engaging discussions, subscribe to our YouTube channel or head over to our website, www.argumentativeindians.com. And if you want to reach out to us, our email is in the description box below. With that, it's a wrap. Thank you for listening in. Good night.